Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Sai.
Hello.
One of the only other hardcore Final Fantasy fans that I know with a level of knowledge required to rank the entire franchise. Now, we initially thought we would do ranking literally everything that would include Crisis Core, the re-releases of everything, Final Fantasy Type 0.
Yes, but I would like to do something else with my life before I die.
Same. So we thought, at least for our first tier maker style video, why not just rank the main installments? Final Fantasy 16 in itself was a bit of a divisive installment earlier in the year, and there's plenty more main installments to get to. So there's a custom order that we have here to tackle them in, and we'll just see how long this takes to get a ranking. We have 5 tiers for this, the S tier, A, B, C, D, and we'll just see how we go. The first one up is Final Fantasy 15.
Oh,
how are you finding that?
Starting off in a controversial place.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So I guess we're going to tell a lot of like stories and sort of anecdotes maybe about our history with Final Fantasy through this.
Yeah.
And I have been of the opinion for a long time that Final Fantasy might not be the series for me anymore, in the sense that they might not be making games for me, and that's fine. I don't have to love all the new games or anything like that, but I at least will try them out a little bit. I'll at least try them out, just give them a time of day.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 15 was a give you a time of day kind of experience, and I played it for 25 hours, and I was like, when does the story start? And I bounce off. The combat wasn't quite there for me. It's something that they've improved with the remakes, and I think that's the general popular belief.
Yeah.
But for me, it didn't do a lot that I actually enjoyed. The characters were kind of cool. I like that part, driving around with your bros. It's quite an interesting, fresh experience, but this would be pretty low for me.
It's for me, it's like a mid-tier one. I think that it's almost like a vibes game. Like, I love the whole you and the boys on the road. I like the obviously it looks absolutely gorgeous. I like the world presentation as it almost just looked like a standard like Americana road trip movie, but then you threw in
cactuars in it.
Yeah, has cactuars in it, has Nadamantois, has all these giant creatures and everything, and I think that vibe elevates it quite a lot, where I did love the journey I was on. However, it's massively knocked by its villain. Like, Arden wasn't a very good villain, at least in my opinion. The version of Final Fantasy 15 that I played through was the one before Royal. It was before they fixed Chapter 13. Chapter 13 being one of the worst stealth sequences in Final Fantasy history. And the little things like that, I think, get in the way of it sticking the landing. So at the end, I get that, and we're going to do full spoilers for everything that's required here. By the time I got to the end of Final Fantasy 15, where you've got the whole, they're older people, they're reflecting back on everything, none of that landed for me just because of how messy that final fight and everything was.
Yeah.
So to me, I'd still have it in the B tier, personally.
Wow, it's still quite high.
Because I think, I don't know. Yeah, when I think about it, I'm like
of tiers,
straight down the middle. For me, it's a B tier Final Fantasy, which is right down the middle, S, A, B, and then C, D. Because it does take a knock for its combat. It was like you just got knocked out of those combos so much.
Yeah, messy. The combat felt messy.
Yeah, but I think I do remember it. I think more positively on it overall.
Interesting. I just couldn't get to grips with what I was supposed to be doing, where I was going. Like, I couldn't determine, and this is more of an open world problem, and maybe more of a me problem, but what was important and what was a side quest and a side. Again, when does the story start? And I've spoken to people, and they're like, "Oh, what you need to do is go on Netflix and watch Kingsglaive or whatever it's called."
Oh, the pre-movie, yeah.
I'm sorry, but if your video game requires me to watch an hour and a half of anime beforehand to understand what's going on, you've just poorly done your story. That's all that quite frankly is.
I think that's very fair. I did watch the Kingsglaive stuff, but it didn't massively factor in. The thing is, you're so right. There's very little story here. It's just get Noctis to a wedding. Like, it is like the road trip, the movie from like 2002 or whatever it is.
I feel like they could have leaned into that better.
Yes.
Yeah. So
should we place it at C for now?
C is fine. I don't think it's right at the bottom. It's absolutely not a disaster.
No.
But there's just so much they should have done differently for me.
That is fair. Final Fantasy 1.
Oh, okay.
I like Final Fantasy 1 a lot.
Final Fantasy 1 will beat you around the face and not apologize for it. It's a brutal game. And I kind of love that about it. It's very old school. I mean, with any time you do like a ranking like this, it's kind of difficult with the origin of the franchise, isn't it? Because it's like, it's iconic, it's what started it all. And I still think, for the most part, when you come in with an open mind about, obviously we're now 40 years on, it's still very playable.
Well, the thing is, like, I played the original, I forget when, but I tried the original back in the day. And like you said, it's brutal. It's really uncompromising. You can easily wander into a part of the map that is, you're not supposed to be there yet.
Yep.
And there's a lot of stuff like that. I think it's, at least for me, if I'm talking about Final Fantasies 1 through 6, I'm going to be using the Pixel Remaster versions of them.
Absolutely.
So the Pixel Remaster of Final Fantasy 1, like, you get things to mitigate the grind. You can do like times 4 XP, so you're not doing as much grinding. It's just sheerly like a time allocation cheat, kind of, essentially. But I do think that makes it a lot more approachable. And I love all the stuff with like picking your party based on the main roles that you give them. I love how like cutesy the art style is, but it relies on its own official artwork quite a lot to bring the whole thing to life. You can see the D&D influence in it a lot. And that made it like this really charming package. And I think in a way it's elevated by retrospect, like it is this sort of relic from 1987 that has been pixel remastered up. But I had a blast with it. It was a very nice, charming little slice of turn-based RPG.
I also think it'd be very easy if you were to look back on Final Fantasy 1. It's easy to assume it's probably just a generic sort of fantasy adventure where you go kill a dragon or whatever. But the story actually has like a nice little twist involving time travel, and the first sort of boss of the game that you face comes back and all this stuff. It's still pretty cool, and it sets up that that Final Fantasy can be this franchise with a heavy narrative, winding narratives and stuff like that, even as far back as Final Fantasy 1. So
Are we saying that that's above Final Fantasy 15?
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
For now, I'll slot that in there. The heart doesn't disagree. The brain might, but we'll see. Final Fantasy 10.
Okay. Middle of the road for me.
Really?
Yeah, I know this is a game lots of people love, and I feel like an element of that, and we're all guilty of this, is nostalgia.
Yes.
Like, it's a lot of people's first Final Fantasy. First game on the PS2, first game with voice acting.
Absolutely gorgeous game.
One of the last games really to do turn-based, classic style turn-based combat. I think some of the characters are wonderful. Some of the stories a little bit up and down, but I think the thing that kills it for me is the linearity of it.
Right.
I think Final Fantasy 9 coming off from that, the story of that's quite linear as well, but not like 10. It just feels everyone makes fun of 13 for it being corridors. This isn't that extreme by any stretch of the imagination, but it's quite similar, and just you go to place to place.
It was so weird. Like, I went back because the last few years I've been back through a lot of Final Fantasies, and I went back through 10 across the last sort of like half a year or so leading to now. And I didn't realize how linear it is. I don't know if we were just sort of blown away back in 2000, 2001, going through it. But like, yeah, there's a lot of corridor stuff. The thing that really stood out to me going back through it is enemy repetition. There are like 3 enemies in the whole game. Like, you get different colored versions of them. But you're fighting tons of these like flying Cyclops bats. You're fighting tons of these little
like
wolves.
Elemental things as well.
And it's like every new area just has a different colored one of them. And the thing is though, I can address the negatives. For me, Nobumatsu's score is a 10 score is like one of those angelic god tier scores. I think that has to like play a factor. I really like the characters and the thematics here. I like all the stuff about like pilgrimages and the idea of life and spirituality and the cycle of life. I like all that stuff. I don't think it's done especially well. I wish there was a Japanese voice track than being just stuck with the dub. Because I think a lot of the themes they're getting at are really interesting. Like graphically, the presentation, the art direction is like sublime. Like every individual location, it really feels like this big like Tolkien-esque journey where you're going from place to place.
Yes.
So I love the journey aspect of it. Yeah. And I think the bosses and the combat style as well. The whole ATB tweak thing they brought in with like the way that combat works, and like every boss has like a different strategy to them where you can maybe focus on like a part of the environment to do more damage, something like that. And you do have access to your entire party as well. You can swap people in and out.
Yeah, that is cool.
And it's like all that stuff works really, really well. So I love 10. For me, it's an A grade. It's not an S.
Okay.
But to me, it would be way up there.
I'm willing to bend on it a little bit, definitely. I know I'm among the minority, and there are definitely parts of it I like. You talked about the story, like it's got some really impactful moments of realization when, with Yuna's story, it's dark, but it's presented in a way that's just not like grimy and edgy and that kind of dark. There's something beautiful about it, and the music, and there's lots of stuff to love about it. Oh,
where do you
like the Sphere Grid as well, to be honest.
I was going to say, I love the Sphere Grid. Where do you come down on Blitzball?
Hated it.
Really? I love Blitzball. When I went back through it, I took the time to do all the Blitzball leagues. That's how sick I was. But should I put that at A for now?
Yeah, I don't know if it will stay there, but let's put it in A.
We'll see. We're going to go back through this at the end and see how it all looks, see how it all sits, how it all feels, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Next one is Final Fantasy 13. One of the most divisive, maybe the first major divisive Final Fantasy installment as the franchise rolled out. 13 was the one where, like
Definitely,
you said, the linearity thing. Yeah,
it was a big thing. It was one of the talking points of the year it came out, just how much it sort of bombed with audiences for its linearity and stuff like that. And this was the beginning of what I said right at the beginning of this. Maybe they don't just make Final Fantasy games for me anymore.
Right.
Maybe this is where my time to sort of start pulling away from it. Hated it.
Right.
I don't like the linearity of it. Some of the music's great. I think the battle theme is incredible.
Yes.
But the linearity of it and the sort of pace of the story, I was interested to find out more, but it just took forever because there was so much screen time given to characters just arguing about stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like everyone's competing to see who's the biggest douchebag. I'm like, I don't care. Like, Lightning's boring, Snow's annoying, Hope's. Yeah,
I think I like the characters more than you, but
this is a D, easy D for me.
I'd probably buy. I would have it like I guess if we're at the minute 15 is a C, so I'd have to go D for 13. But 13, absolutely gorgeous looking game. I quite like the whole like cloud channeling lightning thing that they've got going on with that character.
I like the setting. I should say that much.
Especially the first sort of 5-10 hours, like finding out about the Fal'Cie and like all the stuff with like the way that world is run. Like that's when it had its hooks in me the most. But I never got on board with the combat. Like if we're holding it up against different versions of the game's combat, franchise's combat, like 5's job system, 10's ATB stuff, 12's shake up that they had, we'll get there. But 13's combat, it just plays itself. Like
I was going to say, I was just trying to remember what 13's combat is.
It's just you're just lining up a bunch of moves and it just automates it.
Right. And this is the beginning of the stagger mechanic, isn't it? I think.
Which is like
which is quite controversial.
I love a good stagger system, but I get that it's like this was the first one to put that forward. I totally get that like 13 has had this resurgence, this big defense force like over the years, and I'd love to hear from them. Like if people absolutely love 13, I'd love to know why, because I kind of get it to a point, but the core combat for this franchise as well, if we're ranking Final Fantasies, combat is a big part of it. And I always just found 13's combat to be just so fundamentally lackluster for so long that like I ended up just doing away with it. So
I just remember being told like just keep going, eventually about 20 hours in it gets good. That's not good enough.
No.
Is it? I'm not going to sit through it.
I will put it in the D category.
It deserves it. D for deserved.
We will see how we feel when we come back around. Final Fantasy 9 is up next.
Oh, what a game.
Which is a beautiful game.
I have a feeling I know where this is going to go for you, but out of the PlayStation sort of trilogy, the PS1 trilogy, I'd say it's probably my least favorite, but it's incredible.
I'm pretty confident with it being an S tier. I feel like obviously the conversation is always it was initially the golden trilogy kind of thing of like 7, 8, 9, but I do feel like that expands a lot more to include 6 and 10 as history's gone on. But 9 is so strong. Like I get that it was a return to just Final Fantasy 101 after 8 was a bit more experimental with the draw system and stuff, but 9 was the I think the second one that I finished. I was playing 7 and 9 almost at the same time when I was a kid, because stupid me did a Spinal Tap and went to buy 7 and it wasn't in stock and 9 was, and I was like, oh well, it's too bare, I'll just get that.
Only it worked that way.
Playing through it, but 9 has my favorite ending. Like I love these games for their thematics. I love all the conservationist stuff, like all the eco-terrorism themes, all that kind of stuff, but I love the fairy tale nature of 9 and paying that off, the petrified forest stuff, and you get to have Garnet and Zidane together at the end. It's a very simplistic ending, but for young me, and I still stand by it, I think it was such an uplifting story.
Yes.
And I just love that world as well, all the stuff with the Dark Waltz and the airships and all that kind of stuff. Like I'll slot 9 right in the S tier.
I think that's fair. I think it kind of deserves it. The battle system's great. It's probably one of the best in this series, sort of like for learning skills. It's fairly straightforward, but it's proof that it doesn't have to be complicated. It can still be fun to be like, I'm going to attach this piece of armor and they're going to learn that skill and then I can equip this many skills. The soundtrack is just sublime. It's brilliant and it complements the story that you said so well. Like the moment where You're Not Alone kicks in is just like one of the best PlayStation 1 moments. Absolutely. And it's got some of my favorite characters in the series in it as well. Steiner. He's great. He's hilarious.
I remember, like,
he's so dumb.
When I was a kid, I kind of thought Steiner was like this like angry teacher kind of character, but
Right.
like he's so, like you said, he's like kind of charming, and like you end up like appreciating what he's going for when you play it now. Like there's like a charming klutz kind of nature to him, which is always there.
There's just something wonderful about him jumping up and down and his arm was shaking. It's just like, it's so charming.
If we ever rank all the small little animation affectations that
Best
we
Final
love,
Fantasy
like of the
animations.
shrug and everything else,
Yeah.
I would take that. We should also
Squall's little like stare at my hand. Yeah.
At some point, we should rank all the Sids, because Final Fantasy IX has Oglop Sid, which is like little hopping around Oglop Sid, which I'm a massive fan of. For now, Final Fantasy IX in the S tier. Final Fantasy 12. The first one that I fully bounced off. We haven't got to 11 yet, but 12 was the one where where I just couldn't get on board with the combat system. And I've tried so much over the years. I get what they were going for. I like the idea of automating combat to a point where you can just sort of like rinse through dungeons and it speed it all up. I know that other stuff was added in the Zodiac Age, but 12's overall feel wasn't for me. I like the characters. I love Balthier, but I couldn't get away with how slow the story was, mixed with how, like, I thought really the combat just wasn't satisfying at all. It was just playing itself kind of thing. But your thoughts, because I know you and Adam Strawn over on the main channel are big Final Fantasy 12 fans.
Yeah, I was going to say the precursor to this video is the group chat where we argued about what is better, 15 or 12. The problem is everything you said is correct. Like, it's very flawed.
Yes.
I like it regardless. And I think I like it because it is so different and so bold. And for the same reasons, when we get to other games in the series, I'm like, you know what? They tried something. It didn't always work, but I sunk in over 100 hours in this game easily on my first playthrough. And that's without sort of hunting down all the, are they marks or whatever they're called?
The optional targets
the
and stuff,
optional bosses and stuff that you can do. Just playing through the story and that kind of thing and leveling up and all that.
Was it like a world feel? Because I think the scale of 12 is huge.
It's massive,
yeah,
for better and for worse.
Which I like, because they've done it a few times. They did it with 12, did it with 15, did it with 16. That's sort of what would now be referred to as a Game of Thrones style framing, where you've got lots of like land disputes and family fights and everything. Is it that stuff that makes it elevate for 12?
Yeah, when it clicks, it's really good. I think some of the story is quite hard to follow because it just wants you to, it dumps so much world lore on you, but in a way that's kind of, it doesn't explain it, and you just kind of have to get it as you go. I think the payoffs are great with Bash and his brother.
Yes.
And all that's really, really cool, but it just takes so long to get there. And it's the same all through the game. It's like all the locations are great, but they're all probably a little bit too long.
Yeah.
It's a shame because so much about it I thought was refreshing at the time to go to Ivalice, which is only in spin-off games and Final Fantasy Tactics, and bring that to sort of the main series, and it felt so different coming out of 10 and 11.
I like all
okay, this is cool, this is different, maybe this is the future. Apparently, I guess it wasn't.
That's the thing. I love when you look at the whole history of Final Fantasy, you see them experiment with like, okay, will this get more people in? Will this apply? Well, you know, the whole idea that turn-based was fundamentally outdated, etc. To this day, I want them to do like an Octopath Traveler Final Fantasy, like that art style, just do a throwback thing. But the 12 stuff, bringing the crystals back or making them more of like a thing at the like as for landmarks and making it a bit more traditional.
Even taking like the summons and made that like all the airships are named after the summons. All the summons in this game completely original, stuff like that. Like just little risks for the fans will go, ooh, okay.
Yeah, and it's like because they were coming on. It wasn't necessarily they were coming off Final Fantasy 11. Obviously, the way they rolled out, they were. But like 12 has that MMO feel. Like obviously they're channeling a lot of it, and especially in terms of how you explore and everything. It can feel like a Warcraft. It can feel like a bigger open-ended MMO. What's your gut feeling on where it sits on the ranking?
I would, if this was just me, probably put it somewhere at maybe the bottom of A or top of B.
I would have gone for a C or a B. That's either alongside Final Fantasy 15 or above it and alongside Final Fantasy 1.
I would say then sort of at the bottom of B seems like a fair midpoint.
So we go with B for now?
B for now.
It's above 15? Okay.
It is above 15.
That kind of wounds me, but we'll get back to it. This is the one that I'm not sure how much direct play time we have. I remember struggling to set this thing up. Final Fantasy 11, the first time they tried to do a fully online one, but I think you've played more of it, more obviously than me anyway.
That's a stretch. So I'm not an MMO person, really. It's just not my thing, but I did give it a try. Partly because I just happened to have a copy of the game as a free gift from Games Master. Thanks, Games Master. Rest in peace, I guess.
Shout out to Games Master.
From my subscription to a magazine, they gave me It was the Xbox 360 copy of the game. I think it had the expansions in it or whatever.
That's so cool.
I think it took me most of a day to set up and get online. And then I entered a world and there was no one in it.
Right.
It was basically on. I guess you can't play it offline, I assume, because I must have been playing it online, but there was just no one around. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I was so used to Final Fantasy being like, here's the world, here's the story, off you go. MMO, I was just kind of lost. So I don't really have much experience with actually playing the game. I wandered around the world a bit and was like, yeah, I don't know if this is for me, guys.
I feel like 11 is the one that no one makes the case for. Like, people go back to 13, they go back to 12. No one goes, hey, by the way, 11 was incredible.
It definitely had its fans, obviously. It definitely had its little cult following, but massively overshadowed by 14 now.
Yeah,
Set a precedent that 14 could eventually follow up on, but where it ranks as a tough one.
Oh my God, do we put 11 above 13, even though we've played less of 11, but in your heart, it might be
it's a tough
13.
one because my brain then goes to what has had a wider impact on the franchise. 13 had a bunch of sequels.
Yep.
Are they any good?
Well, a lot of people like Lightning Returns, and I guess you've got all the sphere stuff, you've got all the different costume switching, and the stagger mechanic is a big deal. I would put 11 in the D tier and invoke the wrath of the 11 fans, but at least you're making yourselves known, because I've not heard from you in a good few bit of time.
See, I would have put it higher just because, 14 probably doesn't happen without it, and 14 is such a big deal.
True. Put 11 alongside 15 or above it alongside 12 and 1.
Okay, no, it's down near 15, isn't it? We put it that way.
We'll put 11 next to 15 for now. Final Fantasy 16. Obviously, the most recent example, recency bias could be a thing. However, I effing love Final Fantasy 16. It's one of my favorites.
So the ball is in your court because I've not played it.
Yeah, the thing with this game is that the only way that it follows on from the traditional, the main strands of Final Fantasy are in the environmentalist message, are in the general framing of the story overall, and the fact that you do have the summons like a free and everything. But they are doing the Game of Thrones infused Final Fantasy thing, where all the characters can morph into a free or Shiva or Titan or whatever. I just think that it nails that big gallant, I'm going to go and punch God in the face feel of a JRPG / a Final Fantasy, and that to me makes it one of the best Final Fantasies. I think it's still an ongoing conversation as to where it sits amongst the rest of them in regards to it doesn't have turn-based combat, it doesn't have the traditionalist elements in the gameplay feel, and bits of it are very linear. Like there's bits of it where you are just going place to place, fighting. It's not that much of an impetus on grinding, or you only ever play as Clive as well, one character as opposed to managing a party.
That's a big thing.
And it's like there are big chunks in the middle of it where you are out there journeying with multiple characters at once, like Jill and Clive alongside, and Joshua alongside you. But to me, it still had that gallant core feel. It had the spirit of Final Fantasy. The music is unbelievable. I have to shout out 16's music. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it takes the best stuff. Obviously, Yoshi P directing, you have some of the best elements of 14 and then put back into a single player story. So I had so much fun with 16. I thought it was just so incredibly tight. I think it plays beautifully. I really love that combat and everything. But alongside this competition, I'd put it in the A category personally.
Wow, nice.
I just think that if it's a full package, I think you can argue the traditionalist elements of Final Fantasy. That's part of why these conversations are so much fun. But you can do that with 12 and 13 and 15 anyway. Does Final Fantasy have to be turn-based? No. And if you're just going with what were they going for, what did they nail, 16 is up there and has some of the best character writing in the whole series. Obviously Ben Starr's performance as Clive is phenomenal. There are some great family showdown scenes where he's going up against his mom and he's defending his brother's honor and all that kind of stuff. I love the feel of this whole thing. It was one of the most pleasant journeys I've ever had in a game. I will slide it in the A category for now.
Fair enough.
And we'll see how we go. Final Fantasy V. The overlooked
okay.
hero.
So we're talking old games, so I can talk again now. I love Final Fantasy V.
Same.
I think if you were to ask what's the most underrated game in the series, it's probably 5.
Yep.
Because it's unfortunately just comes before Final Fantasy really taking itself seriously. Does that sound weird? I think 6 is such a grand game, and then you've got the PlayStation games, which are we said the gold years, if you like. Whereas Final Fantasy V is kind of this cute little city comedy thing. It's very they
were kind of all like that for a bit.
Final Fantasy V literally opens and characters have got bug eyes bouncing up and down, and they're all being silly. And I mean, it does have its moments, sure, where it gets more serious out the game, but it's just immediate out the gate. It's just let's have a fun adventure. My friend Boko the Chocobo, whatever. It's it's great. And this is probably And I feel like I think you agree with this, the best version of the job system.
Oh, I love the job system so much. That's the thing that I would hold up there as like some of the best combat and character progression and just general like party building in the entire series. Like I get the argument that it's broken because you can learn too many skills, but I also love that players can figure that out.
Fun.
Totally. And it's like by the time you get to the end, you can just have these combos of different abilities together where you're doing insane attacks, doing 9999 damage, and then you've triggered some other healing ability that then buffs the person next to you, and then they do 99 damage. Like at some point, I love that you can get to that point with an RPG. And I think 5 pays that off really well. I love all of its themes and everything, but at the same time, it is like this fun, almost more Dragon Quest-y adventure. And it's like before they differentiate it a bit more. I think historically, like obviously you've got all the release date stuff. Like 6 was the first one in the West, but it was called 4 and whatever, and like or maybe the other way around. But
it was Final Fantasy 1, 4, and 6 came to the West. So,
but either way, like that whole feeling around Final Fantasy 6 was like, oh, it's like this medieval tale and it's more serious and whatever. And then you play 6 and there's like a squid that won't leave you alone for most of it, and you're suplexing a train and whatever. So like I love how cartoony and like just go with it 5 is, backed by that immaculate combat. I actually was really, really surprised how well 5 held up when I played through it a couple of years ago. So for me, 5, I'm just gonna say is S tier.
Whoa!
I just want to give it its due. It never gets its due. It's
I'm
like
really not against it.
No, I just like you think about Final Fantasy V, how many things it's set in motion. The job system is immaculate.
That. I was going to say the impact on the series it has introduced so many of those classic Final Fantasy jobs, and then even more so when you get like re-releases for the Game Boy Advance later, where they include some additional dungeons and stuff. And I think there's more jobs that come. The more ports that game gets, the more jobs get added into it, and it becomes this kind of exhaustive version of Final Fantasy classes.
Also, the music.
The music's great, but it's just 5 characters, depending on the spoiler, in the party, and that's it. And it's this nice little compact thing, which is quite replayable because of all the jobs and stuff like that.
And also
like Gilgamesh in it as well.
Yes, and like Gilgamesh is like hilarious in it as well.
Yeah, he's great.
It's the character writing, the general tone is like, I guess you'd call it quite goofy, or I would just say it's very charming. Like it's something that even Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is still channeling to this day.
Yes,
and
is 5 the one where the final boss is a tree? I think it is, isn't it?
Oh, he's like this big like mutated. It's like a space slug thing. But there's definitely probably parts of tree in there. But yeah, just 5 deserves its flowers. It always has, and I feel like it's overlooked by 4 and 6 and everything else. Final Fantasy XIV, a game that I ended up playing like 30 hours because we had a sponsored segment for a couple of years ago, and then Square Enix pulled out of it. So I was just left by going like, well, I guess I played 30 hours of Final Fantasy XIV. I feel like as much as I played that much of that game, I still barely scratched the surface with it, but it was enough for me to get it. Like it was enough for me to get that the music is phenomenal, the sense of place is phenomenal. I get why people love all the story expansions. And to me, it's in that wing of Final Fantasy that's all like medieval Game of Thronesy, where it is all about not necessarily land disputes, but like familial disputes and factions and stuff like that. What's been your experience with 14 overall?
This is one I haven't played, unfortunately, because like MMO's not my thing. I've got friends who have absolutely lost their entire lives to this game.
Same
I'm like, well, never seeing you again, am I? And they love it. And as a celebration of all things Final Fantasy, I think that's the big thing. It's like there's so much in there. Over the years, they've added classic bosses and music, all the classes and stuff like that.
Golden
and it's
Saucer.
and it's such a big part of Final Fantasy now. Like literally, when I was doing the research for a video, which will be the one on the end board at the end of this, there you go.
Aha.
So if you want to watch that afterwards, where I talked about Final Fantasy stats, so much research pulled up all this interesting stuff about 14, and how beloved and how many players it's got, and it's this entire other thing. It's almost bigger than the rest of Final Fantasy. Like and obviously the story of it being like this failure that sort of rise out of the ashes to become one of the most popular MMOs of all time is crazy. So even though I haven't played it and it's not my thing, I mean, it's probably an S.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that I do think it is.
I don't want them all to come for me.
There are millions of them now as well. Yeah, the thing is though, like I said, I get the 30 hours in an MMO is very, very little. But at the same time, the time that I did spend in it, I totally got it. The only thing that stood out to me was how simplistic a lot of the quests were. Sure. But some of that is just genre dependent. Like, yes, you're going to get tons of fetch quests in an MMORPG. But yeah, I have no qualms putting 14 at the S tier. I think for the Herculean feat of turning it around, like you said.
Absolutely.
and then doing so well that they gave the main franchise to Naoki Yoshida to just be able to then lead 16. And I think that's really cool. Final Fantasy 2, though, 2 and 3 are the only ones that I've not played, but you've played way more of them. How's 2 doing?
2 will always be the redhead stepchild, I think. And it comes at that time in video games somewhat where people didn't really know what a sequel was.
Right.
You know, your Castlevania 2, your Zelda 2, were trying some pretty wacky stuff. This, I don't think, is quite as extreme departure as those games are. But there are some big, right from the off, like major gameplay revisions where like our battle system is completely different. I don't know how much you know about this, but it's wild in the sense that your stats don't level up as you do. There's no level.
Okay.
You just get stronger the more you hit things. You just get better magic the more you use magic, which means, of course, your HP and defense only go up if you take damage, which is a little odd.
But so forward thinking in a way, because something like Skyrim still does that.
Right,
like
absolutely.
XP based on what you're doing, yeah.
And again, to set off sort of the rest of the franchise where it would be continually tweaking with the battle system and figuring out something new to do with it, it's very bold of them to do. I don't think it necessarily works. I think that's the general opinion that it's kind of broken and whatever, and it perhaps could have done more to differentiate itself from a story and a world perspective. Unfortunately, FF1 was so big that FF2 is kind of just like,
it's there if
they're
you
always
want
released
it.
together. Just play Final Fantasy 1.
Right.
FF2 is also there. It's fine, quite unremarkable, I think, is the general thing.
Does it feel like it keeps the same company as Final Fantasy 15 and 11? Or does it feel like it's higher than that, alongside 12 and alongside 1?
I would actually put it in C rather than... I don't think it's a complete disaster.
Every time I have to go past this Final Fantasy 15, sitting in C, I feel the pain. We'll have to discuss it. Final Fantasy 6, the Titan, the big one.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on 6?
Well, this is an S.
Yes.
This is one of my all-time favorites. It is the peak of Final Fantasy before it became 3D and what RPGs could do at the time. Like, it's crazy to me. I played this on the PlayStation, but it's crazy to me that this is a Super Nintendo game.
Yeah.
And they got so much out of that. It's 2 world maps as well, for one thing. An incredible, like, in terms of range, roster of characters, but also just the number of them. And again, another great battle system where you're using like the summons and to equip abilities that come from them. That's a really cool tweak to it. They make like summons or espers in this game a really important part of it, which is really funny now when we've had 16. It feels like it pulls from that a little bit
totally.
as well. You talked about the sort of somewhat silly parts of the story. It's nice that it has that in there, but it's also very dark and important. And this feels like when Final Fantasy really sort of laced up its boots and tried to make something really impactful out of itself. Soundtrack's amazing. I mean, we say that about all of them, but it just...
Some of them are
just
real god tier, though,
yeah, it's got Dancing Mad in it, for goodness sake. I know Kefka, that's an interesting point of debate. I don't know where you come down on Kefka.
Well, the thing is with Final Fantasy 6, I bought the PS1 one after finishing like 7 and 9 and whatever. I just wanted more of it.
Yeah.
And then I was too young and I was just it wasn't 3D, whatever. I didn't know what it was.
Right.
I didn't finish it back then, but I would re-download it every few years and try again. I had the Steam one at one point. I got it on Switch.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got the Steam one downloaded on my phone and everything. And I eventually got through it on the Pixel remaster. And my thing was, I've heard everything about Kefka for the last 20 odd years, that Kefka's this immaculate villain. And I don't think he is, because he's just this like goofy laugh. I didn't even get anything from him really. He's just kind of like, I'm crazy, I'm so evil. And I was like, yeah, I suppose, like I can go with that. But I thought there'd be more to him because of how much people praise him.
People have talked him up because he's the villain that succeeds at the very least. Like his plan actually goes off and the world gets destroyed somewhat. And then you kind of have to crawl back from that. But I agree. I don't think he's quite as deep a villain. He's basically just kind of like the Joker.
Yeah, totally.
Right. Just evil clown. Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's like super evil jester or whatever. But like that whole thing where, like you said, the plan actually does go through, and that feeling that you get of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let me piece the world back together and go find everybody. And I love that bit when you chase where you find out where everybody is at that point, like time's past kind of thing. And then getting everyone back around and like, yeah, there's loads of bits in the story where they're getting more confident with like cinematic flair. You've got like the step up on the soundtrack just because technology would allow it to be more operatic and more more orchestral. And then you have like the cinematic side of it where you have like the screen will go black and show you what's going on at like multiple time periods at the same time.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
that's such a cool idea. Well.
Even on a slightly sillier note, like of literally the first time you use magic as terror, characters break out of the party, we're all standing in a row, to jump in the middle and go, wait, what did you just do? Like stuff like that. It's really like kind of breaking the fourth wall and like kind of winking and nodding at Final Fantasy tropes and stuff.
That's stuff that we said before about like Final Fantasy 5 and 4 has it and stuff as well. Like the big wide-eyed, like what kind of stuff.
Yes.
6 does that to like an immaculate degree, and like the music though as well. Like there's a certain theme. I don't know what the name of the piece is, but it's what plays when you're in the castle. The castle that can go underground.
Yes.
I think it's actually
Castle Figaro, I guess.
Yeah, the Castle Figaro, and like it's a main character's theme and everything. This was like one of those big steps up. Where
Lots
it was
of reward for exploration as well. Like there's all these characters that you can potentially miss who are not integral to the party, but you can go and find them, and you could only sort of have them join you if you do certain things. And Shadow comes and goes, and you can lose him permanently if you don't do the right things. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not telegraphed, and you have to figure this out.
It's like if one of the big pillars of like retrospective Final Fantasy ranking is feeling of exploration and feeling of like, oh, did anyone else find this? Like, oh, cool. Like some of the biggest ones of them are in Final Fantasy 6. S tier easily. Final Fantasy 3. The beginning of the job system.
Yeah, it's got that going for it. It's like everything about FF5, but probably a little bit less. It's like the proto version of that. After FF2 tried things and people probably kind of pushed back against it being a little bit odd, this is a bit more straightforward. But the ability to swap jobs on the fly is awesome. Unfortunately, I don't think that it's kind of a victim of being on the NES at this point, where it's like it needs a bigger step forward. It's what kept it back, and I'm really thankful that obviously there's a DS remake, which I haven't actually played enough of, as I probably should have done. So it's out there, thankfully, to exist, but it'll always be one of those lower tier games. I think it's just kind of unfortunately a bit of a rank, sort of a fills the ranks kind of thing. It's like it's one of the Final Fantasy games that fills out the numbers. I don't think it's many people's favorites.
No, I don't think. I think at the time it was like, I love looking back at that history of Final Fantasy, where like, because we're about to talk about 4 in a bit, but like 4 would suddenly like leap out the gates with like really impactful thematics and really good character writing and everything else. And I've not played 3, but no one talks about it with any sort of reverence in the way they refer to 4 or 6 or 5 or whatever. And yeah, it's the beginning of the job system, which is awesome, but then 5 would nail that so much that it puts 3 back in the shadow. Does 3 sit alongside 13 at the bottom, or is it higher up with 15, 11 and 2?
That's a tough one. I would maybe put it. I don't want to put it right at the bottom because it's not. As I say, I sort of reserve the bottom for outright disasters, and I don't think this is an outright disaster.
It was doing its best.
Exactly, it tried its best, but unfortunately, with the passage of time, it's just been. This has done it so much better.
Yes, I'll slide into the C category for now, and we'll see. At the minute, only 13 is in the D category, which will definitely get a response depending on how this video ends. Final Fantasy 4. 4 is one of my personal favorites. I love the music. I love the character writing. I love all the stuff with Cecil. I love that they open on. I love the stakes in the first few hours where you just open on the fact that they've just massacred a town and stolen their crystal, and then you have all the betrayals with the king. And I know it's the very, very beginning of the game, but I think it's such a strong intro. Like that and the bombing run are my 2 favorite intros in Final Fantasy history. And I just love how confident it is. But I love the pace of 4. Like it's a mix of how fast paced everything is. The stakes where people die every like 2 hours or so. Loads of them come back, but whatever. And just how big of a journey it is. Like all the different stuff with like you're going into the center of the earth and like you're back up to space again on the moon. And like there are twists upon twists, and there's a stupid twist towards the end about like who's related to who and everything else. But the journey that you go on and how wholesome the whole thing feels, how charming it is, and the combat is very, very solid as well. I loved my time with 4, like genuinely, absolutely loved it. I drank that thing in. So for me, that's another S tier. That's up there with 5, and we'll get there for the other ones. But I don't know what you think.
I like Final Fantasy 4, and it's funny because it makes you, when you look at sort of like where we're at, 1, like all the odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, these are sort of more job system based and that kind of thing. But 2, 4 and 6 is where you get more specific characters and specific stories. It's not the first game in the series to have specific characters. 2 did, named characters. But this is really where character design becomes a big focal point of it. And the story and the characters really go together in a perfect way. Like the whole, as you talk about Cecil and him starting off as a Dark Knight and going through all that and becoming a paladin, it's really cool, and it's fairly early in the game as well. And it kind of tells you this is going to be like a grand unfolding story of character arcs and stuff, which is really nice. And again, it's so funny because you look at that and you go, there's so much of this in like 16 that just like carries onwards. And
totally.
It's so early on into the franchise. So that's really, really nice. Battle system's great. Music is great.
Yeah.
It's not one of my all-time favorites. It probably deserves a replay, to be honest. I haven't touched it in a very long time. I would put it in A.
I feel like there's a lot of there's so much of 4 in 16, like thematically, tonally. Even the whole Dragoon character, the actual icon of 4, is one of the first boss fights you do in 16, nice. And it's shot the same way, the side profile thing. And it's just like, to me, it's the introduction of that thematic core, like that real meaning behind the story that something like 6 might nail. Or people love like how dark something like 7 feels or whatever. And 4 for its time was doing what it could. Like there are a lot of really goofy things in here. Especially some of the boss fights and everything. But yeah, I'll go A for now.
Yeah, sure.
And I might have to make its case again. Okay. But 4 and 5 are very, very similar to me in terms of the feel, the quality, how enjoyable those journeys are. So that would be that. Final Fantasy 7.
I mean,
it's a C. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Stick it right at the bottom. Oh God, where do we even begin? So yeah, Final Fantasy VII. If you ask me what's the best game of all time and not my favorite game, it's Final Fantasy VII.
Nice.
So if we have a rank higher than S, it goes in that.
Yep.
This is such a moment in not just Final Fantasy, but in gaming. JRPGs come to the West with Final Fantasy VII. And there's so many reasons why that is, not just the quality of the story and the characters and the music and the battle system, but just the way that it's all framed and the thematics of it, and the sort of crazy mix of steampunk stuff and fantasy, the way you're exploring the world map and it's one thing and then another. It's just a wonderful concoction of everything. It all somehow ties together to create this melting pot that Square has continued to go back to over and over again.
I do think
better and for worse. And I think people are tired of it. And it's so obvious to be like, it's the best one. I'm sorry, it's nostalgia as well, but it is the
thing is, though, it's nostalgia. And I remember playing through it. I would get home from school, me and my friend would make cheese toasties and just sit and play Final Fantasy every day. It was a delightful time. And I loved it from then on. And like you said, when someone would ask what's your favorite game, it was Final Fantasy VII or Metal Gear Solid 1. And it's always held up there. But I go through 7 every sort of year or couple of years or so. I just fire it back up. I've got it on every platform my own. And I'm always going through it. And I'm very precious of it as well. Like I end up critiquing the remake and Rebirth because of how much that original one landed. But when you're talking about how well it does this art style and this overall like unique feeling, I love the feeling of Midgar in the original. There's something so industrial and quite scary and cold and metallic about the original Midgar and the original presentation of that story. And the thing is, like, it does suffer from some of the mistranslation issues, like the whole general idea of where Sephiroth even is like a whole thing with like trying to understand the pieces of Jenova that like he's masquerading as and whatever. And I get all that, but I think you can't deny, like I said, the sense of adventure. If we're hitting those pillars of like sense of adventure, the music, the character writing, it doesn't really put a foot wrong. Like even with those mistranslated bits of dialogue and stuff, it never really impacted the actual hit. And it has my favorite thematic beat in the whole thing, which is Cloud discovering that he's enough, like by himself.
Yes.
That he doesn't need to live up to being this glorious soldier and everything else, which is going to be a whole spoiler for Rebirth, whatever. But all the Zack stuff, I love that whole scene where him and Tifa puts his mind back together and he realizes who he really is.
That's one of my favorites.
And it's that's maybe one of my favorite character revelations in the whole IP. And so for me, it's nailing those things, and it's a less is more thing. Like the actual animation in those scenes isn't great, with him in the wheelchair and they're falling in the live stream.
Super goofy, yeah,
very goofy. Quite close to like Final Fantasy 4 and 5 and 6. But it has that deep core that means something, and that came from the other ones, but it's executed on so well.
Yeah, I sort of dare anybody to listen to the main theme of Final Fantasy VII, the map theme, and not feel something. And that piece of music itself kind of tells the story as well as any words could. Like there's so much just dripping off of that. It's such a unique mood, and it persists to this day. Like it's still powerful to this day. And yeah, as I say, some of that's absolutely nostalgia. That soundtrack is the soundtrack of my life as well.
Yeah.
So I can't shake that about it. But yeah, even just the stupid stuff like Ket Shi, like makes me smile. I love Yuffie. The Turks, who are these insane murder squad dudes that are actually kind of funny as well. It's like, well, you just like killed hundreds of people, but now we're over here talking about which girls we like. It's just a wonderful tale, and yeah, what an impact it had on gaming. It's you can't not put it in S.
7 is an easy S. 7 is the S, even though I always think, depending on the day, Whether it's my personal favorite is 7 or 9, they both really landed when I was a kid. But I love like the tone of 7. Like it does have that more like brutalist kind of feel to it. The last one we have to slot in is one of the ones that in modern years has become a big old talking point, Final Fantasy VIII. As to whether Final Fantasy VIII got its due, there was a whole thing internally where Square Enix apparently lost the master files for Final Fantasy VIII, had to find them again. That's why the game didn't get remastered for so long. But thankfully now it's available, and there are various versions of, the remastered version of Squall or things like that. But 8 was the one, again, back when I was a kid, went to get Final Fantasy 7, ended up buying 8 and 9 and going through them as well. And when you're in school, I think going through the layout of Final Fantasy 8, like being in uni kind of thing, is such a vibe, like it's such a feel. And that kind of makes it age really, really well. But thoughts on 8?
Yeah, I really like Final Fantasy VIII. 7 was where I came into it. I was probably not that surprising. It's way with many people our age, I guess. But then, 8 was the first one that I bought for myself. So it's special in that regard.
Nice.
It's massively flawed, but there is so much underrated sort of stuff about it. The military school thing, which is not it's a bit
Seed.
odd. Yeah, it's
The final twist is ludicrous as well.
Of course. Unfortunately, the thing about Final Fantasy VIII is Disc 1 is so strong, then it starts to fall apart. And the story kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense, unfortunately, which is a shame because the world's really good. These crazy gardens that can move around the world and all this stuff. But then you get, we all knew each other. We all had amnesia. It's like
all the stuff, like the things.
Fakes.
Yeah.
I really like it, but I know it's not great.
I think stuff with, I forget all 3 of their names, but Laguna and the other 2 characters that are...
Kiros and Ward.
Thank you. That you occasionally see when Squall seems to go to sleep and then beams into them. They never really tie that off in any...
I actually kind of like they leave it vague, to be honest.
Okay.
All the forum debates about that back
It's
in the
been
day.
fun because everyone's always like, is Squall actually dead? Like, does he die when a deer hits him with the spike thing? Like, there are a lot of conversations that came out of it, but I get the retrospective love of it and saying when we talk about the PS1 ones or the best in the series, 8 is always like kind of hobbled by the negatives that we just mentioned to the point that it doesn't get to hang with 9 and 7 and whatever. And I don't know, I do kind of agree with that. Like, I do think there are issues with like the draw system. I never personally had much of a problem with it, but I get what people do because you can just kind of break your own save.
Again, if you can break it, it's fun to me. Like messing with it, and it's good
how many
stuff.
hours you're going to lose, though.
Well, if you break your save, that's a different thing. But in terms of abusing that system, is very fun. The Guardian Force system, again, refreshing. It's super fun. Said the world is a big thing for me. It's not just a fantasy. I'm not saying that Final Fantasy IX is just a fantasy world, but this is more my kind of speed, like that hybrid sort of sci-fi twist and stuff like that.
Also, like Nobuo Uematsu's score, like, and again, like
incredible.
The thing is, like everyone talks about 7 score and 9 score and whatever. 8 score is maybe a little bit overlooked, like, and one of his absolute best. Like, great character themes, phenomenal, location and themes as well. 8 is probably an S tier.
Ooh, I wasn't expecting that. I'll take it.
I can go with it being on the same, being on A and then being alongside 10, 16, and 4. That actually maybe feels better.
Yeah, I got excited, but I think it is an A. I'm being realistic about this. It's kind of silly to call it S. It does have problems.
Yes.
It does have, characters like Irvine who not really developed whatsoever.
No, true.
And the time compression stuff.
There's all like really the aliens and the crazy twists.
It does have triple triad, so pretty good. But I think A is probably fair.
This is another one where, like, if this video does well, by the way, we'll do more Final Fantasy stuff. Final Fantasy is always a bit of a back and forth thing on the old YouTube, but at the same time, there are so many mini games to talk about. Like,
ranking all the mini games.
I would rank all the mini games: Triple Triad, Queen's Blood, Tetra Master, or whatever.
Terrible master. I don't know.
I'll slot this that way so you can see how we're looking. But from the bottom up on the D tier, we have 13. Are we in agreement that
that is the absolute bottom of the list?
I will just say completely honestly that I want people to make the case for 13. I've played it so many times. I've never thought it was anything better than just a slog. I love seeing people who are defending it, but I've never seen someone actually really make the case for it. And I've watched watched many hours of YouTube videos going, I love 13, this is why. And it's mostly just a feel, or it was their first one or whatever. And I just need to know more of a defense of that game if it doesn't deserve to be on the bottom.
Yeah, I would. My thing is, it's very easy to kick it, but I would like it to be. I really would like to. I would like to love that game, but it's just so much about it that just no for me. It doesn't work.
If we go onto the C tier, 15, 11, 2, and 3, I would campaign for 15 to be one tier higher, and leave 11, 2, and 3. I just think 15, I think as much as the villain's not very fleshed out, the combat can be a bit annoying. It was like a prototype to get towards Final Fantasy VII Remake or 16. 15's characters are so good. Like, traveling as that group is so much fun. The world is extremely well put together. Like, it's such a great space to explore. The music's actually surprisingly really nice. I forget the name of the composer, but I love the feel of that whole game. I think there's something about going on that ride. And if we talk about like the Tolkien-esque monomyth vibes of Final Fantasy, then it's a hell of a ride to go on.
Looking at this now, this is very much like if I had sat down and made this by myself. It's pretty close to be honest. So it's not like I can sort of barter with you and be like, well, we can move that up if we change this. But to be honest, I'm quite happy for it to move up to B if that's what you like.
I will take it.
The vibes are impeccable.
Yep.
But yeah, I just wish that it just had a bit more of a story drive.
I know what you mean. And I think it's a weird thing. It's almost like intentionally empty, and it was a product of like a really weird development cycle and just what they had left after so many years of developing it. But I quite like how open-ended it is, where it's just hang out with the boys, go on a big journey for as long as you want, and then get to the next thing when you're ready. So B tier, Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 15, and Final Fantasy 12.
It's an interesting like trilogy of games.
I would say like 15 to me is what 12 is to you. And then like it seems like 15 has its fans, 12 has its fans, but I think they would maybe struggle to say that it's really up there.
It's really funny because these are both games that have improved so much with the benefit of re-releases, haven't they?
Yeah.
Like, what's the Final Fantasy 15 one called? The Royal Edition. And 12 had Zodiac Age, where it's like the better version of the license board and stuff like that you talked about earlier. So it's really funny, yet flawed games that probably got better over time. So they probably should be in sort of the middle tier. And Final Fantasy 1, haggard by time, of course. It's available everywhere, though, but still a pretty good time
and still and
a part of history.
Yeah, and like a solid package. Like if you're picking up Final Fantasy 1 now, obviously we would both recommend the Pixel Remaster, not the original, even though the artwork that came with the original is awesome.
I played the crap out of Dawn of Souls on the GTA. That's the version I have to start.
Right, okay. I like how just stripped back the original is. I think if you're a Final Fantasy fan, go back to the very first one and you'll see why it all set off so much and the thematic beats that carry through. Our A tier is Final Fantasy 10, 16, 4, and 8. I'm okay with that.
Good. I'm okay with that as well. I mean, I wouldn't put 10 quite that high.
Right, okay.
But again, there's a massive case for it out there, and there's a lot of positives about it. So out of the sort of A group, it's probably the bottom one for me.
Fair. I think for me, like 10, like where it's let down for me is like I said, the enemy variety, and just obviously some of the bits of the story that they don't really nail in regards to what Seymour represents and like how sort of violent of a individual he is, and then the tone kind of betrays the reality of what he's done by like genocidally wiping out a whole populace that isn't necessarily reflected in a lot of the writing around him, and then the whole space whale, my dad's a whale, etc. stuff. I get all that. But at the same time, we can defend the Titus laugh scene. That scene is meant to be intentionally awkward. He's trying to get Yuna to be more comfortable.
Yeah.
But
I'm quite surprised that the 8 has made it into A, to be honest. I think there's been lots of people in the comments that are going to be like, boo!
See,
I'm okay with it.
At this point, as we record this in 2024, I feel like the amount of retrospective conversations that happen around 8, around 13, and around something like 5, like, it's time to give these games their due. And I feel like there's been a whole campaign for Final Fantasy 8 to be up there a lot more. So we'll do right by the people. Unless they don't like it, but they'll let us know. So that'll be our A tier. And then S tier is Final Fantasies 9, 7, 5, 4, and 6. Which 14. Is very, very nice. 14, sorry, and 6.
Yeah, that's a pretty good...
I mean, about right.
That's a lot of games in S, but they are all deserving of it, I think.
I feel like I really want 4 to be either switching places with 5 or to bring 5 down, depending on how much you don't feel 4 is an S tier Final Fantasy.
I kind of want to put 5 in there just for the japes of it.
But I do think 5 deserves its flowers. Like I said, I think 5 set a lot of things in motion.
I think we start the campaign now, don't we? Like, this is one of the best Final Fantasy
The thing
games.
is, let me just try this on for size. If I put that up there, that is the absolute best of the Final Fantasies that you need to play. Even as I say that, I would also have 10 up there, but then I'm getting too subjective.
No, I don't need. I can't have 4. I can't have 4 up there.
Really?
No, you can't. I'm sorry, it's not. I'll take. I move 15 out for you. We can't have 4 in there. Do you
That's
think,
very true.
Do you think? Let's talk about Final Fantasy V though. Like, do
Yes.
you think S or A? What are you actually?
I'll go with S for 5 because I think that the combat is immaculate. I think it's one of the best combat systems, job
Purist
systems.
version of Final Fantasy.
Yeah. Like it's such an enjoyable set of systems to get to grips with, and you really feel like you've spec'd your party your way by the end of it, which is a feeling that you can't necessarily say for all of them overall. Even though the lifeblood of Final Fantasy is in having this party build, and like the group chemistry is so awesome in 5 if you really play into the job system.
Yeah.
So I do think that elevates it considerably, and the story is just so much fun. Like it's very, very goofy.
The question is now,
Yes.
if we want to do this, is the order on the tiers themselves? Do we do that from bottom to top? Is that what you want to go really in depth with this?
Oh my God, we totally could. I feel like we will do that in future tier rankings because we'll find some
You're
way
welcome.
to animate it or something. Like, I don't want to have a knife
Sit
fight.
there and drag it around forever.
Yeah, a knife fight over 15 versus 12. For now, everything in its respective tier is as equal as anything else. But let us know how you found this down in the comments below, your favorite Final Fantasies, and feel free to debate us over Final Fantasy 13, but you've got to debate well. For now, I've been Scott Tailford. That's been Cy White.
Ta-ra.
Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll catch you very soon. Goodbye.